Like for me, work and all this stuff has really been a means to an end for independent life and not having to worry too much
Yeah.
about money. But now we're talking about potentially growing some legacy money, where we can put money back into the community. We can support certain charities that we love, and potentially leave a foundation that can continue to support organizations and charities after we're gone. So, we're starting to think about that, what the last 20, 30 years of our life starts to look like, and what do we leave behind without children? We don't have that form of legacy. So we're focused on some other stuff where we can hopefully give back to communities. We're looking at some cultural donations right now and some other things that we can do with
Mhm.
some of the money we have. So yeah, that's important for us.
Let's give this a go. Nick Iozzo, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Whenever we meet, whenever we get together for coffee, I walk out thinking of you as the world's most interesting man. That's that Dos Equis ad campaign from a few years back. And the reason is that you always have so much cool stuff on the go, including a technology that may just change the world. So thank you for joining me today. And amidst all of this, you never seem to break a sweat.
Well, first off, it's a very generous intro. I don't think I've never been accused of being the most interesting person by anybody. So thank you for that. Well, I wouldn't say I have a tendency to, not necessarily show all of the anxiety and the turmoil that goes on in life. At the end of the day, it's something you somewhat internalize, but it's not always there for everyday consumption. But yeah, no, it's a good facade sometimes that people put up just to make sure, my anxiety isn't necessarily the best thing to talk about over coffee. But no, it's maybe perceived to be easy or simple, but I'm not sure it actually is at the end of the day.
It's you really pull it off though. And I thought I'd begin by asking you about 2010s. Take me back to 2010. By that point, you had worked for a couple of companies
Mhm.
and you decide to strike out on your own. And that point in a person's sort of journey always intrigues me because here you are, you have a certain level of predictability and let's call it safety, but you make the choice to kind of jump in.
Mhm.
So take me back to then.
I guess that in 2010, I would have been early 40s. I'd had probably 8 jobs, and I fluctuated between doing a job for a year or 18 months and then doing a job for 5 or 6 years. So I kind of went back and forth, but I always stayed in the same industry. So I worked for government in the electricity sector, and then I worked for consultants in the same space. So I always never really had a boss because I always created a new business line for the companies I worked for. So I was
Mhm.
always good at building business, but I wasn't doing it for myself. And so, after doing it for 14, 15 years for consulting people. I learned a lot about how not to run businesses. I got frustrated because of the bureaucracy I was in, whether it was small engineering, big engineering.
Mhm.
I kind of a reactionary human being. So when I got truly frustrated, I was just embarking on a new relationship roughly at the same time. Also, we kind of chatted about it and we said, yeah, it was time to do it for myself. So having built the business, I like to say 3 times for somebody else, I decided to build it once for myself and just took the leap. Didn't my first business plan wasn't in depth or necessarily showing anything exciting, but it was enough to convince me I had an opportunity to build something for myself.
I see. So it wasn't the case where you were going from a purely corporate role and jumping feet first into the entrepreneurial role. You had already kind of within a company setting taken on kind of a sliver of what was to lie ahead.
Yeah, I knew how to build a business, but I didn't know all the stress of doing it for yourself and all of the fun stuff that comes with having to meet your own payroll and having to, entrepreneurship is somewhat of a lonely journey because you can't really look over your shoulder and ask somebody to make a decision for you. There's really not a
Yeah.
lot of support systems when you're on your own and you're building a business because everybody looks to you for answers and decisions. So that was a bit of a different challenge. That part of it, cash flow management, was something I hadn't really dealt with previously. Being the guy that replaces the toilet paper and orders the coffee, you always have people kind of doing that stuff for you. So it was a different, but you're right. I understood the business. I understood how to sell the business, this business I was in. And so that
Mhm.
part of it was somewhat um, easier for me. And so jumping into that entrepreneurial side, was the scariness of walking away from a really good salary and like I said, embarking on a
Mhm.
new relationship, embarking on new investments in real estate and all the rest. So picking up different costs and then walking away from that big comfy check was, stressful. Put it that way.
For sure.
Yeah. I still remember my 1 month when I had $1,000 left in my line of credit and I had to make payroll. So, which was that point was more than $1,000. So that was a stressful week. So I still tell that story to young entrepreneurs I coach that, cash flow management is probably the most critical thing to an entrepreneur.
It seems to be a common thread in almost any entrepreneur's story. I mean, I just read Elon Musk's book, and the amount of times that he's not only in the red, but just seems to be beyond any hope it's remarkable. So it seems to be a common thread in the entrepreneur's journey. And it's almost rare to come across a story where you don't hear of, that entrepreneur being on the brink of financial disaster.
Mhm.
And perhaps that's in part what spurs us on that, hey, there's not a company check coming your way. I need to find a way to pull myself out of this.
Yeah.
So with this company you founded, DPM, it was roughly 12 years from when you founded it to when the company sold. I'm fast forwarding now to that time, 2022. You had built this up to something highly successful from the ground up, even changing toilet paper rolls at some point. It's once you sold and 12 years of madness were in the rearview mirror, at least to some degree. What at that stage from 2022 onwards, you're still incredibly busy and involved and inspired, I find. So what allows you to keep that inspiration once sort of your main play, so to speak, has the book's been written to some extent? I think you would think with human nature, one would want to take a step back and relax. But then again, when I read stories of successful entrepreneurs, it never seems to end. And so maybe you could speak to me about the feeling once the company is sold. What sort of inspires you just on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, the selling of the company is an interesting concept because when you do the same thing, I was in the same business effectively for 36 years. My entire life was tied into that business. The people you talk to are all kind of business related. So when you sell a business and you kind of step away from that, it's interesting that the change, you don't really judge the change it's going to have in your life when your phone stops ringing, your emails come down quite quickly. But you do need to do something else. So you can't just, I did it when I was 60, no, 59. So it's kind of still young to just stop and do nothing. There's still a lot of you got to keep your mind going. Getting into another startup and working with student entrepreneurs was kind of my outlet in the beginning. So I didn't go from 60 to zero overnight. So you do need to keep your mind working on some things, and staying in the entrepreneurial space was something that was important for me. And working with young students is kind of invigorating because you get a sense of all that initial energy you had when you started your company, all the excitement and all the challenges that you've had when on day one, you get to share with them. So you get to see how their stresses are and you get to help them move forward to become entrepreneurs. And there was a lot of that. And I had previously been involved with Purist, and so Purist was a good outlet because it needed more attention from me to keep growing. So I kind of refocused, and I'm learning a lot that way. So even with Purist, I learn a lot, even though I know some basic business stuff. I don't know the technology really well. I'm the business side of the business, not the technology side of the business. Learning a lot about patents and other things. So, just being inquisitive and continuing to learn is important. Yeah, so it's you can't go from 60 to zero overnight and not feel stressed. So you have to fill the void with something.
You struck on something that really intrigues me, and it's mentoring young entrepreneurs, and you do so in part via this organization called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. Here's why, in part, I feel it's so priceless for a young entrepreneur. I went to U of T Commerce, and this might get me flagged off of their group page, but my sense of the background of the professors was that they had only been in academia. So everyone's heard this knock before, and that was my experience. So you're learning from textbook, which sounds already incredibly outdated, and not necessarily from people who've been out there in the trenches. And so if I'm a young guy, maybe 25 years old, and I just went to business school, I don't know that I've learned anything that's going to really equip me for what the real world is all about. So for someone like yourself to step in and say, hey, I've been through the trenches, and here's what you need to look out for. And I sort of take it that you're not being necessarily prescriptive in this, but you're kind of helping these people along, avoiding some of the pitfalls perhaps you had to maneuver through along the way.
Yeah, the focus was on student entrepreneurs. So not necessarily just students going into commerce, but students that had businesses or fledgling businesses or ideas they wanted to turn into businesses. So EO had a program called GSEA, the Global Student Entrepreneur Awards program, where, I worked with the students at the local level and hopefully they would get up into the higher levels of the competition. So we work with entrepreneurs specifically that were students. And there's a lot of incubators out there. There's a lot of people, like when they go to school and they take business courses, there's a lot of people that talk about the mechanics of business, the mechanics of growing a business. But what people don't, where the students are struggling is the life of an entrepreneur isn't just about the business, the stresses it puts on relationships, family, the stresses it puts on an individual as they try and grow businesses. They just don't understand how that's going to impact them personally. So even though we do give them some tips about how to start their businesses and how to keep their businesses growing, we really focus on them as people and as entrepreneurs, and just trying to share the impacts of the entrepreneurial lifestyle on an individual. Because everybody thinks they want to be their own boss until they are their own boss. And so I don't think people really appreciate some of the challenges of being your own boss, especially as you grow a company from 3, 4 people to 50, 60, 100, 200, the different strains that are on you as an individual. How do you build teams? How do you build trust? So we work with them on those very specific things. And then the other second part we do is we create what we call our version of an incubator, where we put 6 or 7 or 8 of them together in a room so they can share amongst each other and do peer-to-peer learning and sharing. So we teach them how to be vulnerable. We teach them how important it is to share with people in their peer group so that they can learn from each other. Because it's like I said earlier, it's a very lonely existence. So when you kind of hang out with other entrepreneurs, you get to start, like you said, cash flow is a very common thing. Even though they're not in the same business, they share a lot of the same struggles, and just being able to talk to each other so they're not quite as lonely, they create incredible bonds. So we focus on them as individuals, not necessarily on their businesses. And I think that's the big distinction about what GSCA is we hope they're going to build 10 or 15 businesses over their lifetime.
Wow. I think sometimes about the future of university education. And we always hear this, how fast moving the world is today. Going back to my time in university, even then I thought things were kind of stale. Like, for example, in our economics class, we learned a theory. I think it's called black shoals. And it was a major chunk of the term. And since I graduated, it was entirely disproven, this economic theory. So I fast forward to today and I think today is like back then times 100 in terms of the pace of technological change. And so I'm imagining a future where something like an EO is in fact how young people learn about business in a role of mentorship, in a group setting, and not necessarily in a formal setting of university environment. Now, I haven't been on a campus to take a class in decades. But I wonder to what extent universities have adjusted the curriculum to reflect how things are today. And I don't know that they have.
No, I don't think, at least as it relates to entrepreneurship. I know some of the business schools dabble a little bit more in it. Some of the universities have their own entrepreneurial programs, but I don't think it's quite as embedded as it should be. Because when you look at what's going on with Canada and what's happening with the U.S. relationship now, if Canada doesn't get better at fostering entrepreneurship and fostering job creation with small businesses, it's going to struggle. Because at the end of the day, small and medium enterprises are what really drives the jobs. So getting these kids that have these great ideas and allowing them to grow businesses in Canada and stay in Canada is a critical part of our transition away from being a U.S. An economy that is dependent upon the U.S. as much as it is. And I think that's the one struggle, even now with purists, is understanding the federal government is not very good at supporting enterprise. Provincial government's much better. It seems to understand the value in homegrown jobs and preventing us from taking intellectual property into other parts of the world to monetize it. The provincial government, I think, is much better than the federal government right now. Hopefully, whatever government we get is going to understand that entrepreneurship is a critical part to the growth of Canada.
A critical part, and I think more critical than ever, given what we have going on with this tariff madness.
Yep.
And if there's been anything encouraging from this, it's that all of a sudden, hey, we can be proud to be Canadian, and it's okay to wave the flag. And let's look inside the country at lost opportunities. Our productivity rate is, I believe, at the lowest amongst the 40 top nations of the world. And so the future of the country, I think, is very much at stake, if I'm not overstating things. So again, just to circle back to what you're doing, I think it's priceless. And it's something that, I'd love to, I'm talking myself into this. I'd love to be involved in at some level someday. So maybe for our next coffee,
Maybe
we can delve into that. Okay, you brought up Purist. This is a technology. Let's start from scratch. It's a technology you've described it to me. It seems that if it's what you think it is, it's absolutely revolutionary and game changing. And so take me through maybe from the beginning or maybe the latest. I know you've been from when we first talked about this, it was more conceptual. And now you've been through hard testing and you have real data. And I'm really curious to see where things stand at the moment.
Yeah, so I first got into Purist through my partner John Kurtoff, and he was in the traditional wind turbine business. So he was developing offshore wind in Canada, and he was a big project in Lake Ontario was killed off by the Liberal government of the day at the province when they banned offshore wind. So John and I have known each other since 2016. We had a common contact that pushed us to get together. We had a coffee that turned into what I guess now is almost a 10-year relationship. And so when John got a hold of Purist, the core technology of Purist, and started to build the business, I kind of was on the periphery. I was an early investor. And so Purist is a fairly innovative way of taking wind and what we hope to be water and using it to create energy, electricity predominantly. Because it's not a traditional wind turbine where it's big blades you see that are moving all the time. It's self-contained. So we have a rotor system in the middle. We have a housing that contains the airflow, which enables us to put it in unique places. So because you don't have these big rotating blades, you can put it on top of buildings. And we believe we can, there's a solution for mobility where we put it on moving vehicles to charge as you drive. So we've been building prototypes since 2020. We did a full-scale test of the stationary version in 22 in the big wind tunnels on the east side of Toronto at Oshawa University. And then we tested the mobility in this year. So we built a full-scale prototype of a Tesla semi-truck, and we replaced the deflector that is above the cab before the trailer, and we replaced it with our technology so that the deflector doesn't look materially different than what it is on a Tesla. You just see a small opening and a couple of exit holes on the sides. And so we had really robust testing of that in February of 25. And we think we have a viable product that can charge the Tesla as you drive.
Incredible.
Yeah. So like I said, it's because it's very innovative in how it controls and captures the wind. It allows us flexibility. So we're going to move forward with getting what we call demonstration units now into real world testing, both in a truck version and a stationary version on a building.
You know, as you're describing that to me, I have this vision of the perhaps not so distant future. I'll get your input on this, of driverless trucks crossing the continent and having minimal necessities to stop to refuel, so to speak. And you know, I sense that you're on top of these things, and really, it's anyone's educated guess. But my question is, at what point does driverless technology take over? So I've read that they've done these trial studies on the road in San Francisco with taxis. I think they're called Waymos. And they have a lower rate of accidents per mile driven than as humans. And so is it one of those things that we think it's far off, all of a sudden it's right in front of us? And I liken it a bit apples to oranges, but I liken it to Uber. When the concept of Uber was explained to me, I thought it was nuts that someone would hop into a stranger's car and be taken somewhere as if it was a taxi. And yet it became the new normal within a matter of a couple of years. What's your take on this? And do you contemplate the sort of merging of what you're doing with driverless technology?
Yeah, because a lot of the problems you're going to see with driverless technology, which is based on an EV platform, an electric platform, is always the need to stop and charge. So stopping and charging requires massive infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, to allow those vehicles to continue for an extended period. So, you know, as that technology matures, there's obviously a lot of computer technology that has to go forward, sensors and things to make that technology viable. Where we get the benefit we start creating is the ability to do it for an extended period of time without having to stop, and also reducing the need for electrical infrastructure to support the evolution of electric vehicles. So, you know, that's why I think the dynamic change, we help the dynamic change because we help eliminate some of the range anxiety, which is the prominent issue when you look at trucks and cars, people don't want to buy them because they think they're going to get stranded somewhere. So it's from that perspective, you know, we allow the enabling of the technology to get absorbed more readily in the general public, because we eliminate some of the key obstacles to EV today, which the number one being range anxiety, and then the second one being charging infrastructure and the cost to deploy effectively electric gas stations at the same density as we have, you know, gas stations. So that's where I think we kind of help the technology roll out by eliminating some of those barriers.
And you're perfectly positioned for this in a country like Canada. The density of these charging stations is a real limiting factor because of our geography. And perhaps in Europe, it's a factor, but not to the same extent. So I can't describe how intriguing the work is, because you have what you're working on, which is groundbreaking enough, but you seem to be coming to just the right moment in time, because like you say, these charging stations, that's the part I've always had trouble wrapping my head around, because, well, when you think of gas, it's highly mobile. And you can have a tanker out, and I'm picturing the middle of the prairies, and you can have a gas stop there, and it's not a big deal infrastructure wise. Electrical is a different concept. And it's just now in this conversation that I'm kind of linking the two. So that's incredible.
Yeah, and like I said, there's massive cost to deploying electrical infrastructure, especially in there areas where there's not a lot of density, because instead of putting your fuel on a truck and driving it, you have to put it on a wire and run it. So there's massive cost to the electrical grid to try and support that rollout of that technology. So, we hope Purus is going to mature and get more efficient. As we get more efficient at creating electricity, in theory, the batteries become more efficient at storing it. So there might be a crossover point where, we could get to the point where we charge as much as you consume when you're driving.
Yeah,
we're not at that point yet, but we want to move forward to that kind of a part. And then we're looking at, so we're trying to look at other options for it. Right now, we're focused on the EV because it's kind of low hanging fruit. It's got a lot of space we can tuck our equipment into, but we're going to look at cars, SUVs, and we're looking at a water solution so we can see if the technology works in run of the river. So you can take things like the Amazon or the Mississippi, and you can start using that to create electricity on the shorelines.
It's, the possibility seems endless. I think you're going to be highly involved for the foreseeable future, because it's a sort of technology that kind of has no bounds.
And as an entrepreneur, you got to decide when your job is, when you're able to continue to a certain point. There's a certain point where the technology matures, the company's bigger, it needs a specific skill set. So, part of being a successful entrepreneur is also understanding when what you're doing is beyond your skill set and you need to bring in some real experts. And, you always want to keep your hand on the rudder so the company's going in the right direction. But by the same token, you got to understand when you need a very particular skill set to keep it growing. So that's our next challenge now with my partner and I, is to understand when we need the additional help of people to help us license and royalty our product, or to help us on the engineering side to do faster R&D work and modeling. And so that's kind of our next 12 to 18 months, is to understand how much expertise we have to add to the team to keep it moving forward.
Do you sense that you have the level of expertise needed here in Canada to keep it Canadian?
Oh yeah. I think there's not going to be a problem finding people that understand how to license the product, how to get it into the right hands, how to build the right connections. I don't think that's the issue. I think as a licensing organization, we can keep the intellectual property in Canada. There's always the issue of, as a profit focused business, where's the best place to make profit, and then it comes down to which parts of the world support that R&D more effectively. Like I said, right now, we can see how there are certain jurisdictions in the world that support the R&D stages and support intellectual property maturing much more than what Canada is currently doing. So, we're still Canada focused. We love what Ontario is helping us with, and so we want to do our best to keep it Ontario made and Canadian made as much as we can. So yeah, no, we're committed Canadians. We're committed to staying in our jurisdiction. Our partners that have supported us are also very focused on building their wealth in Canada and keeping it in Canada. So at this point in time, we haven't been tipped into that direction just yet. So we're hoping to stay focused on keeping our intellectual property and keeping our money in Canada.
That's great to hear, and that's exactly what the country needs in these coming years. Did you get in touch with Tesla at some level?
No, not yet. No, we need them.
Elon, if you're watching.
Elon, if you're watching, we'll be happy to show you we'll be happy to show you what our prototype looks like on your truck.
I feel that you need just like an intriguing 30-word post to his X account.
We're working on a little teaser video from all of our test stuff to see if we can create some excitement somewhere about it. So yeah, no, we're working on that. So it's part of our go-to-market strategy now. Now that we've got good collateral, we've got a lot of good data from our testing. We're trying to focus on how to increase our profile in the world so people get to know who we are and what we can do, and start to build those relationships.
I got the concept for this teaser video. It would be your truck versus the standard truck. The standard truck is pulling off the highway in the middle of the desert to charge, or there is no charging station, has just left derelict there on the side of the road while, your version of the truck keeps on trucking. So
I'll put that in front of our experts and see what we can come up with.
Okay. A few rapid fire questions for you before we wrap up. What's the best news of your week so far? We're only at Tuesday, but tell me a bit of good news.
Well, my roof isn't leaking this week. That's the good news.
Ah,
We had a bit of a personal issue with our roof leaking over the winter, and it's all resolved, and
mm.
our contractors are all gone, so we have peace and quiet back in our house.
Oh, that's priceless. Living through a reno is not fun.
No, it's not.
Is there a quote or a mantra that you live by? Or are you more seat of your pants?
Yeah, I would say I'm more seat in my pants. I'm not one to be driven by those kind of things. I don't read a lot of self-help books or that's
Mm.
not the way my brain works. But at the end of the day, I was talking with somebody today who's struggling a little bit. And I said, at the end of the day, change takes work. There is no free
Yes.
lunches. So if you want change, you have to do the work to make change. If you want to better
Yeah.
yourself, you want to change your job, you want to do something, change is work, and do nothing isn't. So, take your pick.
I've really struck recently by sort of as the years have gone by, I've shifted my interest from, let's call them self-help books that speak to, for example, visualization and that sort of thing, more towards the philosophy of just get out there and do it.
Mhm.
And you're going to fail and you're going to learn by failing. And each time, each iteration, you're going to get better at it.
Mhm.
And so there's somebody I'm watching now on my feed, Alex Hormozy. So he's a successful entrepreneur. He started very modestly. He was a gym owner in the States. And what he does is he takes struggling gyms and for a fee helps turn them around.
Mhm.
He sold that business for something like 40 million US. And this was a few years back. And since then, he hasn't sort of sat on the sidelines. He continues adding to the empire. So his ethic is very much just get out there and do it and repetitions. And
Yeah.
I find that lately that's really speaking to me much more so than, say, sitting back and visualizing your success and writing out your 10 top bullet points for what you need to see happen in the next year. That's maybe all well and good, but getting out there in the field, nothing replaces it.
Yeah, and you have to have faith in yourself at the end of the day. Like you have to have faith in your judgment and your ability to make decisions. And that doesn't necessarily mean you just believe everything you believe. You have to have some kind of rigor in doing decision making to make sure you're making
Agreed.
decisions in the right way, but not being afraid to make a decision because, not making a decision is as bad as making the wrong decision. So it's having faith in yourself and understanding what you need to make a decision and then make that decision and move forward.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head with that. All right. Next up for rapid fire, what is one thing about you that would surprise most people, even people that know you already?
Um, I always say because we used to do this one. I ran for politics once when I was in university, which was it wasn't necessarily a mistake, but a very eye-opening process to go through when you're young. But I think that the amount I've changed over time. Like I used to be a fairly aggressive person, almost to the
Mhm.
point where um, you either loved or hated me. And I think over time I've become much more calm. So the people that have known me the last 5 or 6 years may not necessarily see that,
Recognize.
recognize that version of Nick that was when I first started get going in my 30s and 20s when I first started building businesses. There was a certain amount of
Mhm.
aggressiveness that thankfully doesn't exist today.
Right, got you. And it's almost a requirement when you're getting things started, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, being pushy and being aggressive back then it was part of the business development cycle, especially in the world I was working in, where I was working with land developers and utilities and things like that. So very confrontational business. So
And incredibly frustrating because 3-year projects turn into 10-year projects, and you must have been pulling out your hair
well, I
daily.
was working on Eglinton Crosstown when it first started. And that was 12 years ago. We first started working on Eglinton Crosstown, so we see how projects can be never ending. We do a lot of LRT work.
I find on Eglinton, people have it's so overdue that there's not even a buzz about
No.
it anymore.
Yeah.
People have even stopped complaining.
There won't even be
And
balloons.
so I think it's going to be a shock.
There won't even be balloons when that thing opens.
What's your hot take? Is it going to open this year, do you think?
Oh, it has to open this year. If it doesn't open this year,
Right.
there should be a whole bunch of people should be getting fired. Should have been fired already. But if it doesn't open this year, then that's
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not sure what motivates Doug Ford to do something at that point, but something has to be blown up if it doesn't open this year. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Last question before we wrap up. A goal or a dream that you've been chasing for a long time. It seems to me that you live your life very much in the present in the sense that there's something put in front of you and you go for it. But do you have sort of an overall goal, let's call it, or is the work itself and the accomplishment sort of on a day-to-day basis? Is that the goal?
No, I don't think that's the goal. That's the means to an end. Like for me, work and all this stuff has really been a means to an end for independent life and not having to worry too much about money. But now we're talking about potentially growing some legacy money, where we can put money back into the community and we can support
Mhm.
certain charities that we love and potentially leave a foundation that can continue to support
I see.
organizations and charities after we're gone. So we're starting to think about that, what the last 20, 30 years of our life starts to look like, and
Mhm.
what do we leave behind without children? We don't have that form of legacy, so we focused on some other stuff where we can hopefully give back to communities. We're looking at some cultural donations right now and some other things that we can do with
Mhm.
some of the money we have. So yeah, that's important for us.
And that's priceless because I feel like this city, uh, if it were not for the philanthropic efforts of some of our leading citizens, I feel like the city would be crumbling even more so.
Mhm.
So the little that gets done so often seems to be based on some philanthropic
Yeah,
giving.
yeah, like
And whether that's Sick Kids or the Queen's Park North project that was just announced, I get the sense that things would be a lot worse without this.
yeah, like one of the big projects I was involved with at DPM was the Bentway, the park under the Gardner.
Yeah.
And that's fully funded by philanthropy, and now it has a conservancy that's all private money supporting the
Mhm.
continued operation. Without that conservancy, I don't know if the Bentway would be as successful as it is today, because it had it been turned over to the city to operate, may have struggled because the city doesn't necessarily have, it doesn't consider that kind of money priority spending. So the fact
Right.
that that was all
True.
built and operated privately, I think is a big success. And if they use the same model for Queens Park North, that should be another successful public space for the city.
What a legacy to
Mhm.
leave behind. It's something that future generations can enjoy.
Well, yeah, that's part of the big thing with DPM. We did a lot of public space work. So even though people don't recognize our name, you would recognize the projects we worked on. All the waterfront park systems, that little bridge at King and Queen over the Don Valley, the Riverside Bridge was one where we lit that up. So we've done a lot of high profile public projects. We've been part of teams that have done it. So even our staff is pretty proud of driving around the city and seeing what we've done, because we're small parts of very big projects.
Oh, that must be a wonderful feeling, like something at the scale of the Portlands project that's slowly coming together after so much effort.
Yeah, we did the Pan Am. We were on the Pan Am Games. We did the Pan Am Village, all the
Mhm.
Queens Quay redevelopment. So a lot of stuff Waterfront's been doing, the very positive changes they're making down there. We've been involved with on small pieces. So yeah, that's the
Mhm.
kind of thing you can drive around. You can see the big subdivisions and the big land development projects you've done and the public spaces you've worked on. So it's important for us to share that with our staff and get a sense of pride of what they're doing.
I'll wrap up with this little anecdote, recent anecdote. Jonathan, who you referred me to, your name came up the other day when we got together, and he said, "Yeah, here's my memory of Nick. I haven't worked directly with him for a few years, but we were walking into a room full of politicians, developer CEOs, and it was for some critical project. It may have been Portlands, but something of that scale. Nick started the meeting. He was in the middle, and he was at the end, and he knew." He was telling all the stakeholders, this is exactly what needs to be done. And I had a chuckle because I thought, yeah, that's Nick taking charge and having the answers.
Mhm.
So it was really easy to picture you in that moment in that meeting room.
I think I know what it is. I think I know what project it was too, but we won't mention it. But yeah, I have people have said that one thing about me is I can change the tenor of a discussion in a room. I've earned my gray hair. I've been doing this almost 40 years now. So, doing the same thing for 40 years, you develop really strong bonds. You develop a
Yeah.
skill set that some people value. So, and my communication skills sometimes can lead me to manage the conversations in a room. We'll just leave it at that.
And you have the
That's
gravitas
right.
that I'm
Yeah.
still working hard to build up on. Nick, thank you so much for your time this morning. This has been priceless and a lot of fun as well.
Thank you all. It's first time for me, first time for you. So hopefully it's a positive
Yep.
for everybody. Yeah, it's been great talking.
I couldn't be happier having you as the first guest.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.